Hello and a very warm welcome to today's webinar brought to you jointly by the Donkey Sanctuary and World Horse Welfare, Often Invisible, Rarely Seen, Working Animals and Water Resilience. We're just going to mark time for a few moments for everyone to join, and then we'll start shortly after 1 p.m. British summertime. So good morning, good afternoon or good evening to wherever you are. Hello and very warm welcome to today's webinar as part of World Water Week, Often Visible, Rarely Seen, Working Animals and Water Resilience. We're delighted to bring this to you from World Horse Welfare and the Donkey Sanctuary. And this is a second of the joint Donkey Sanctuary World Horse Welfare sessions at this week's World Water Week, following on from Monday's event, introducing the role that working animals play within communities, particularly regarding water security, resilience and adaptation. And today we will be discussing sustainability and the role of invisible workforces, both human and animal, in community livelihoods, gender empowerment, climate adaptation and resilient responses. Just to get us going with a few points of housekeeping, only the speakers can access the Zoom functions, the audio and chat functions that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. But feel free to post questions or comments in the Pathable chat. This is the first time I've personally used Pathable, so it's a bit of a learning scenario, but I hope that works well. We will be having a Q&A with speakers following their presentations. We'll have 3 presentations and then a good time for Q&A. But throughout that, we'd love to hear from you. So for the first question, and to get you going, and hopefully get used to the Pathable chat function, it'd be great to know where you are joining us from today. So if you could put that in, then we'll reflect back on those later in the day. So over the next hour, I'm delighted to have a panel and 3 speakers, 3 really impressive speakers. Daniela Battaglia will be known to many of you from the Food and Agricultural Organization, Kusam Athakarala from the Network of Women Water Professionals, and Chandiwe Chidavarama, who is from the Women and Land in Zimbabwe. So as we reflect on today's webinar, there are in 21st century world over 100 million working horses, donkeys and mules that contribute to the livelihoods of some of the world's poorest communities. Yet their crucial role remains largely unrecognized, making them visible but rarely seen. Throughout World Water Week so far, you will have seen a lot of images and video showing animals carrying water, but you'll likely not have heard any reference to those working animals and their importance in the sector and in development at large. In rural areas, working animals travel long distances multiple times a day to fetch fresh water that is used for a variety of purposes, for drinking, for washing, cooking, for cleaning, for livestock, for crops. Imagine how challenging this work would be for communities without the assistance of working animals. And imagine too the impact this would have particularly for women and for girls, because most often it is women and girls with the chore to collect water. Without working animals, they would have less time to carry out other fundamental activities, such as attending community events or going to school. And women would also lose the income generated by their working animals, income that empowers them and enables them to afford essential services such as food, education, and healthcare. And then, of course, there is climate change. Working animals represent precious assets for communities having to face firsthand the effects of climate change. They are one of the most versatile types of livestock and can access the most difficult terrain. So taking part in World Water Week is a precious opportunity to showcase how working animals can be part of a holistic solution to create a long-lasting and sustainable change we want to see in relation to better water management to overcome the current challenges. Collectively, we need to acknowledge the role of working animals in achieving the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular SDG 6, water and sanitation. So before I introduce our first speaker, we'd love to get you involved again to ask a question whether you have come across working animals being used for water collection within your communities or the communities that you work with. So if you could put your simple yes or no in the pathable response, that would be great. So moving to our first speaker, the use, availability and management of resources such as water is complex, with a diverse range of end users dependent on secure and sustainable supply. With humans and animals being dependent on this vital resource, both continuity of access, such as via working animal transport, and the safety and quality of the source are key. So to explore this further, I'm delighted to introduce Daniela. Daniela Battaglia is the livestock production officer at the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. She is responsible for the organization program of the work on animal welfare and coordinator of the FAO Sustainable Livestock Technical Network. She is also a member of the FAO Working Group on Antimicrobial Resistance, holding an MSc in Agricultural Science and another in Tropical Animal Health and Production from the University of Edinburgh. Prior to joining the FAO in 2001, Daniela worked for 9 years for the European Commission and has been based in several countries, including Belgium, the UK, Peru, Suriname, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Israel, and Tunisia. Daniela, I'm delighted to hand the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Rolly, and good morning again, afternoon or evening to everybody. I'm particularly happy to be here today and discuss with you and focus on two very important global common goods, water and health and welfare of animals. And I would like to shift a little bit from what has been discussed in very interesting Rolly's introduction and what has been discussed on Monday. So shifting the focus from how much working animals and working efforts are important for water use and how important water, its quality and safety are for those working efforts. So unfortunately, while a lot of attention has been given to define and secure standards of water quality and safety for pets, animals of high economic value, or food producing animals because of the risk of contaminants present in water being transferred to animal source food, I believe not adequate care is given to the importance of the safety and quality of water for working animals. And I know some of you may think at this point that it's very likely that in many situations where working animals are used, human beings have no access to enough drinkable water themselves. But this should not be a justification for not taking care of our animals in the same way we care for ourselves. Securing access for people and animals to adequate quantity and quality of water should be high on all our agendas. So water in the same way of feed could be a source of chemical, biological, and physical contamination that in turn could generate toxicity and wide range of diseases and discomfort in animal, or could even harm them in the case of physical contamination. Contamination occurs naturally in water, of course, but more frequently it's a result of man's activities, including waste disposal, for instance. Now, especially in the arid and semi-arid region of the world, where most of the working animals are found, working efforts and animals are commonly provided with poor or marginal quality water for several months of the years. Water supplies may originate from small wells, canals, streams, water holes, and occasionally such water is high in salt, which may cause physiological upset, low welfare, or even death in several animals. And climate change has only exacerbated the problem by increasing drought and high temperatures in many areas, while causing also floods and water contamination in others. Now, water provided to working animals should therefore meet hygienic standards and be of suitable quality for the physiological, reproductive, and working needs of those animals. But luckily, there's not only bad, there are some good news. We're aware of a whole range of good practices that could help in this effort. Just a few examples. Now, taking good care of tanks, pipes, and other equipment used to store or convey water should be taken care of. They should be of appropriate material, which do not produce unsafe levels of contamination. For instance, through the leaking of heavy toxic metals. Sewage, waste, rainwater should be disposed of in a manner which avoids contamination of tanks, equipment, and water offered to the animals. The sites where animals are held should not be close to farms, dwellings, mining, industrial operation. They can pollute the groundwater and generate also runoff, resulting in contaminating the water in the site. But also particular attention should be given to the unfortunately higher and higher likelihood of water waste from closed animal farms being contaminated with antimicrobial residues or antimicrobial resistant pathogens. Often, most of the antimicrobials given to farm animals are disposed of unmetabolized through their manure, or they're also present in the water that is given to the animals. And those could cause harmful effect to the animals because being exposed to pathogens which are not responsive to antimicrobial veterinary drugs, but could also, on the whole, generate antimicrobial resistance. So a major problem nowadays. But in evaluating the usability of any particular water, local condition and availability of alternative supplies will play an important role. We have to take into account a number of factors, of course. What is the water source, seasonal changes, but also the age, the condition of animals. Of course, lactating, young, weak animals are normally much more susceptible. The feed composition, the species, some species being a little bit more tolerated, the others to the under standard quality of water quality. But specific standards on salinity in water do exist, and they should be taken into account when assessing the quality of water. In the same way, maximum level for potentially toxic substances are known, and again, they should be taken into account. Now, I could continue on this topic for a while, but I don't think that's the scope of this talk, to provide you with exhaustive information, but rather to highlight the importance of taking care of good quality and safety of the water. I hope I've been successful. I will be available during the question and answer section for any more specific information. And I think for the time being, I better stop here, and thanking you a lot for your attention. Thank you very much. Over to you, Rolly.
Daniela, thank you very much for that really interesting sort of insight into the importance of water quality and safety. And as I say, we will be coming back to Q&A shortly after our next two speakers. So please do put your questions in the Pathable chat function. And it's brilliant to see such a global audience. And responding to the question we asked, we've got people from Morocco, Botswana, Sweden, France, Lebanon, Nigeria, Spain, and Malaysia, and probably many more too. And so it's great to have you with us. So thank you very much for joining. Now, questions and discussion about resource sustainability and security are a constant, as Daniela has just introduced for us. This is increasingly noticeable when normal operation is challenged by external factors, such as the adverse impact of climate change, and making these questions ever more urgent. In these cases, the importance and value of integral relationships between water and invisible groups, such as working animals and women, is ever more important and needs to be highlighted. So I'm delighted to introduce Kusam Athakarala, who's going to speak to us about the impact of disasters and climate change on people and animals, including the role of women as foot soldiers in action to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Kusam is a former academic and a multidisciplinary and skilled development professional. She has been internationally recognized for pioneer work in gender and water. For example, she is the recipient of the International Water Association's International Women in Water Award and the Zonta Woman of Achievement for the Environment, working on a global to a local level as a sustainability advisor, development consultant, and resource person for a range of national and international organisations. Her work is extensively cited in peer-reviewed journals, and Kusam holds an MSc in Managing Rural Change from Imperial College London. Kusam, I'm delighted to hand you the floor.
Thank you very much, Rolly, and welcome to everybody who's listening to this program. And I must tell you, I'm so glad you invited me, because my thoughts go back to gender issues in water and development studies 25 years ago. And that is where women were also barely visible, hardly seen. And it has been quite a process, and quite a lot of progress has been made. So I'm really happy. This is the first time that I had encountered a mention of quadrupeds in any water meeting in 25 years. And I'm so glad that this meeting has helped me to encounter my own glaring blind spot related to working animals and their relation to climate change and disaster risk resilience, the issues that I have been working on. Next, please. When we talk of NetWater, the Network of Women Water Professionals, which we started 25 years ago, we have a triple A process: awareness, advocacy, and action. And I think that for me and many of my colleagues that I talked with about working animals, we are still very much in the awareness position. In Sri Lanka especially, we don't have donkeys except in one small place called Kalpitia. But I've read up a little bit on this issue, and I found this very interesting story of the Sri Lankan gypsies, the women being given a dowry, which was a donkey and a cobra because they were snake charmers, the donkey possibly to haul on all the baskets. So when we took a look at the role of working women in rural communities, very often from my perspective, we would think of cattle, but then we have never really looked at the needs of women, animals in water supply or their contribution to food security. Now, the water supply in most of the countries that I know this is different in MENA countries, in African and Arab countries, but in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, we have really not encountered animals, donkeys, as being used to haul water, except in a very few instances. So when we look at women and animals in the rural communities, more and more what we see is that we are seeing the victims of climate change. And we need to see how we can encounter a situation where not only women as victims, but also women as catalysts for climate change, and women for whom a working animal, a donkey, could be one of the most precious assets that they would have. What would be their access to those, obtaining those assets and looking after those assets, especially as was mentioned, in a situation of diminishing water availability. When we look at climate risk resilience, and disaster risk resilience, we see some images, for instance, of the Kerala floods of animals being washed away. But we would maybe look at it and say, oh, I'm sorry for that animal. But we also have to be sorry for the woman or man who owns that animal, because it is possibly his or her life savings being washed away, and probably without any kind of recompense from the state. So the impacts of disasters and climate change, and we have been working on it, I have been working on it, but now I think I would take a wide-angled view to look at the impacts on women who are animal owners, and what happens to them when this household asset and the working animal supporting their livelihood security is lost. Especially this is very important for poor women, because most of the people that I've sort of encountered in the pictures and my scrolling around are women who are using them for carrying bricks, carrying water, and maybe for carrying other items. But in one very interesting piece of information that I got is the Halari donkey in Gujarat, a very rare breed, which is maybe close upon extinction. But their milk is 7,000 a liter, Indian rupees. Normal milk in India is rupees 60 a liter. So I believe that there is a kind of a possibility where we have to look at value-added livestock breeding, which could support women's incomes and livelihood security. Why do I like to call women the foot soldiers of climate change? Women are always the ones who do a lot of groundwork, but they are very rarely involved in the decision making. So what we need to do is to upscale their involvement by involving them in decisions about resource allocation, about climate change risk resilience. And we also need to try and promote these foot soldiers into at least sergeants, and if not actually generals. That's a bit of a jump right now. So next, please. We would want to try and I think that there are two places that I could sort of see. One is insurance, livestock insurance policies. Do our countries which have working animals have livestock insurance policies? Especially in a situation of disasters, can we get some kind of a remuneration for looking after animals during that period? Is there some system which involves not only women and men being in camps during disasters, but also livestock? Next slide, please. So these resources which are there, I mean, when you talk of climate change and disaster risk resilience, everyone is stretched to the core. But if we can have the livestock insurance policies, perhaps this is going to support women and the working animals, because that is their very valuable assets. The second thing that which came to my mind is, can we have some kind of a capacity building program for women, training as barefoot veterinarians who can deal with in many of our countries, in many developing countries, there are very few veterinarians especially in the remote areas. So can we train women to deal with the simpler issues maybe? Because I know that in Netwater, we once had a training on women and water for dairy farmers, female dairy farmers. And that came out, I think that came out fairly well. But I'm sorry to say that was the one and only time that we did a program like that. As I said, quadrupeds just don't come into our equation. So if we can have a holistic approach, we talk of a holistic approach. Rolly mentioned SDG 6, but I think it is not only SDG 6, but SDG 1, 2, and 13, which will be addressed if we do a development program which involves supporting women to look after their livestock, their working donkeys, the working animals better. So I think that for me, this has been an eye-opener to formulate our programs in a much more holistic manner, bringing in other animals, such as it's not only the cattle that we have been thinking of, but especially working donkeys. So thank you very much for putting the working animals, donkeys especially, on the radar. Thank you.
Kusam, thank you so much. And I certainly agree that, obviously working animals do provide part of the answer to so many more of the SDGs, as you've rightly pointed out. And I love your your photos there certainly sum up the title of Barely Visible, Hardly Seen of the seminar or the webinar so well. So that's brilliant. I just thought I'd bring you the poll results. Does your community or the community you work with use working animals for their water collection? Wonderful to see that 60% have said yes, but of the 40% have said no, most of you have said, but you'd be really interested in further information. So you've come to the right place. And although highlighted by disruption of the status quo, the links between water, women and working animals are part of everyday life for communities around the world, and all are relevant and required to support lives and livelihoods. So to explore this further, I'm delighted to introduce Thandiwe Chidiverama, speaking about the relationship between women and water, climate change, and working donkeys in an African context, including both practical and cultural reference, which is so important. Thandiwe holds a master's degree in strategic management and an honours degree in politics and administration. She is above all a successful farmer with over 40 years experience in farming, having grown up in a rural setting, sent to school from the proceeds of farming and working with rural women farmers. She is the national coordinator for women and land in Zimbabwe since July 2012. She believes in human rights-based approach to development and self-sustainable use of natural resources. In order to end poverty, there is need to empower rural women. Her vision is to see just that the distribution of land and other natural resources and full recognition of women's land rights. Amen to that. Thandiwe, delighted to hand the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rolly. Like he said, I'm Thandiwe Chidiverama. I'm with Women in Land in Zimbabwe. So I will be sharing with you about the relationship between water, women, working donkeys, and climate change or natural disasters. So culturally in Zimbabwe, women and girls do all the household chores, and among other things, these include water fetching, firewood fetching, growing and processing of food for the family. If a woman fails to put food on the table in our culture, it depicts one of a woman who is a failure in the society. And because of climate change, we have noted that nearby water sources are drying up or diminishing. Thus, rural communities are being affected in terms of water supply. And this has also been compounded by fragile sources of livelihoods in developing countries, and Zimbabwe, one of them. And this has further widened the gap of inequalities that are found between women and men. So women and girls, we see from the cultural perspective, they are bearing the brunt of climate change when carrying out their cultural gender primary responsibilities. And this is now being further worsened by the coming in of the COVID-19 pandemic, which came with a lot of regulatory measures to try and stop it and minimize it. And in this country where I'm reporting from, that is Zimbabwe, we have seen measures trying to limit free movement. And by limiting free movement, what the government has done was to stop all public transport. And we have seen limited access to public transport, and also some women would have been using this public transport for other uses, for other for transporting water, for transporting their crops, but because of the coming in of COVID-19, we have seen increased the need for water and donkeys for women, and water for washing hands, water for making sure that there's hygiene in the house to try and keep the coming in, the spreading of the coronavirus. And then looking at the women and water, we have noted that the lack of sufficient water supply in rural communities has disproportionate effects on the lives of women and girls. Like I mentioned, that it is further widening the social and economic gap between men and women. And we have seen that in Zimbabwe, 70% of the household chores are done by women. And like I alluded earlier on, women are supposed to do the household work. In Zimbabwe, in our rural areas, we don't have water taps. Water is fetched from some shallow wells, some even fetch water from rivers, some from dams, and some from boreholes. And because of climate change, we are seeing these nearby water sources drying up, which means women have to carry sometimes 20-liter buckets on their heads and walking maybe to a minimum of 4 kilometers, but maximum can go up to 6 kilometers, seeing women carrying water for use in the household. So, and again, if you look at the biological nature of women, we want water more than men because of the physiological build-up of women. So we see donkeys serving as the legs, backs, arms, and heads of women throughout the developing world. Then water and women, water and agriculture. For us in Zimbabwe, 70% of the rural, 70% of the women in Zimbabwe, they reside in the rural areas. And 70% of the population who are residing in the rural areas are women. And we have also noted that the rural population, they rely on agriculture for their livelihoods. And when there's no water, it means that livelihood has been disturbed. And we also have noted that women, apart from the household chores, they are also doing the most laborious labor or labor-intensive activities in the agricultural sector. Thus, when water is not found nearby, it means that labor burden for women has been increased. So we see now, if you look at the pictures, we see women now resolving to use the donkeys to help them in carrying water for household needs, carrying water for watering their gardens. Then, like I mentioned, that with COVID-19, we have seen the need for water increasing, which means increasing the labor burden for women. And then in the picture, you also see the donkeys. They are being used by women to go and ferry water. And like I mentioned, that women are walking very long distances to fetch water. And then the one thing that worries me most is the fact that donkeys and women, they do all the hard work for the communities, for the households. But in terms of being recognized, they remain invisible. The other speaker also spoke about the invisibility of the working animals, the donkeys and the women. The donkeys, they play a very fundamental role in terms of lessening the women's cultural labor burden. And they support families' livelihoods through their direct and indirect contribution. Yet they remain largely disfavored and invisible. They are generally excluded from the definition of livestock. I'm referring to where I'm coming from the rural areas where I grew up, I'm working. They're excluded. Whenever they're buying medicine to cure or to prevent diseases for their livestock, they will not consider buying for the donkeys. And we have seen this is because the donkeys, they are resistant to different diseases and environmental stresses. And because of this resilient nature, donkeys are now being abused in the name of being resilient animals. We have seen donkeys as agents of development. The use of working donkeys in drawing water carts and bringing water near to the homestead, reducing the time women spend in fetching water and giving them time to work in other economic activities, and also being used to ferry water to do gardening by women. Donkeys are very, very important in the lives of the women. So, and we also have noted that in terms of management of water sources, women are usually excluded, and it's men who decide where a borehole should be sited. It's men who decide where the gardens are to be put, but the women who are the sole users of water, of the water wells or the boreholes, are never consulted in making those decisions. And what have we done as an organization to try and improve the lives of women, girls, and working donkeys? We have facilitated in the most driest areas in the country. We have drilled some boreholes and put some gardens, and we are using solar. And we also recently got support from the Donkey Sanctuary, where we are constructing water troughs for donkeys and also facilitating growing of fodder for donkeys. This is new in Zimbabwe. People would rather keep fodder for cattle, for goats, and for other livestock, but for donkeys, they didn't. So this is the first time, and we are conducting our awareness raising among donkey owners and donkey users on the importance of donkeys, and also sharing with them the good ways of looking after the donkeys. So in terms of recommendation, we are recommending that we need nearby water, and working donkeys and other equine animals play essential roles in the part of transport. So it is therefore important to provide better support for these animals. And we've noted that women and the girls, they provide labor in terms of carrying water or fetching water. We need to have water services near them to try and reduce the time and the labor they put into fetching water. I think I will end here because of time. Thank you.
Anyway, thank you so much for that really practical insight into the role of working animals, the vital role of women, and in terms of managing the vital asset of water. So thank you so much for that. And I loved some of your, the donkeys are the head, neck, body and feet of how the communities have coped through the COVID pandemic. So now we're going to move on to questions, and thank you. They have been coming through thick and fast. And just in terms of Thandiwe, just to pick up on how you finished that, I mean, obviously there's a crucial role that working animals play, but Henning has asked, in a day when potential vegan argument against the ethics of using working animals, should the world be looking for alternatives to working animals, or do you see in the communities where you've had experience that actually the role of working animals is here to stay? Thandiwe, do you have a thought on that?
Yes, I think we might have alternatives in terms of trying to reduce the labor burden given to working animals. I've seen in other communities, there are some three-wheeler motorbikes with the van, and which uses solar to power them. If these are invented, they're made available and they are cheaper, they can replace the lot of work that is being given to the working animals in rural areas. So we need to embrace technology. We need to be very innovative. Let us look at other ways of trying to reduce the work the donkeys are doing, as well as also trying to find underground water and make sure that the rural communities have got water nearby.
Thank you, Thandiwe. And that's a really interesting thought, because obviously using mechanized transport obviously is not such a green asset, is it? So it then creates a tension there, but it's a really interesting thought. So thank you to that. Kusam, we've been asked by Alicia, what is the division of roles between women and men when it comes to managing working animals? I know you haven't had direct experience of working equids, but could you provide some insight on that from a Sri Lankan perspective? Sorry, Kusam, you're on mute.
As I said earlier, you know, donkeys and we don't have donkeys and horses as working animals in Sri Lanka, but I've seen them used extensively in India, in the Asian, India and Pakistan. But we really don't have them in Sri Lanka. The only donkeys that we have in Sri Lanka are feral donkeys in a place called Kalpitia, which is known mostly for dolphins and kite surfing rather than donkeys.
Brilliant, thanks, Kusam. Daniela, I'm going to ask you, in many ways, it's a $64 million question. Why do you think that both animals and women are still so invisible in the eyes of policymakers? Alice has asked that.
Well, okay, from the side of the working animals, I think it's their economic value is still not well recognized. So the internacy means that the work that they provide is not visible, is not quantified financially. And in a world where everything is quantified financially, that the work of the animals, and I would say, I would couple with the work of women. The household work has never been quantified. There's been many struggle, I think, since the 60s in wanting to quantify the value of household work and recognizing it and making it valuable and widely seen. And to date, even in the so-called developed countries, this is not happening. So whenever you don't put a figure next to the work we provide, other women or working animals, that work somehow is not visible.
That's a really interesting point. And to pick up, Kusam, on what you said about, I loved your 3 A's of awareness, advocacy, and action. But part of awareness is what you're saying, Daniela, is we need the evidence to be able to create that awareness. And if we want policymakers to sit up, then we need to be able to show the research that has been undertaken to show the role of working animals and their importance and the relevance of women, but also their importance to clean water. So to ask Thandiwe, I mean, in terms of the research that you're carrying out, I mean, is that something that's firmly on your radar to be able to create this body of evidence that can create the awareness to create policy change? Is that something that's on your radar, Thandi?
Sure. I think a lot of work needs to be done, and because of the need to have facts for us to back our advocates, we've done research and we've seen the relationship and the invisibility, and we've seen who are the tillers of the land, who are the providers of food, and who are the transporters of the food that we are boasting of is the women and the donkeys. And then we are using this information that we have to try and use them as our advocates tools to try and influence policies in Africa as well as beyond, to try and increase the recognition of the contribution of the working animals, and women included among the working animals.
Thandiwe, thank you. Kusam, you want to come in there?
Yeah, yes, Dorothy. I think I'd like to add to what Daniela said. You know, a lot of these areas which are under-researched, these gray areas, we never get the money to work, for instance, on women's access to resources, access and control of resources. So when you don't have a data, as she rightly said, we don't get a seat at the table. That's what it was for women, and probably women as owners of working animals, we don't have the same, we don't have the, these gray areas always need qualitative assessments. And very often as researchers, there's never any money for this. So no money, no data, and then we don't have this, the support of organizations which can maybe help these women and the working animals.
That's a really interesting point, Kusam. And the English saying there, or the British saying, it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, which comes first. And just to explore that a bit further then, where, in your view, Kusam, where should the funding come from to develop this body of evidence?
Well, as we have been saying as Women for Water Partnership in many fora, including yesterday, this is the overarching issue. The 0.05% of development funding goes into women's organizations. That is so minuscule, you can hardly see this. So unless you support them in supporting animal owners, in supporting the welfare of the working animals, we are not going to see much of a change. So we have to go back to that AAA, build the awareness, which will also lead to advocacy, as you are doing now through this program. You know, this is the first time in 25 years I've had a session in Stockholm about quadrupeds. It's usually bipeds. And we need to look at this, what really happens to development funding. And it is also linked to this, my earlier point, that we look at SDGs in a very fragmented manner, but we should look at clusters of SDGs. For instance, for this particular issue, we need to look at 1, 2, 5, 6, and 13. So very often we sort of paint ourselves to a corner by saying, okay, I'm working on SDG 6. I think we need to look wider.
It's a really good point. Daniela, from your perspective, I mean, I assume the FAO's ability to fund in this area is very limited. What thoughts would you have about how we can develop that funding to develop this body of evidence?
Again, as you say, it's also in our case a little bit the chicken and the eggs. We are governed by our member countries. So it's our member countries that have to tell us, work more on this area or in the other one. So if they're not aware themselves, if at domestic level they don't give enough attention, it's going to be very difficult that they will tell us, you know, give more attention to this matter. So again, somehow with more data generated, we have to be able, what is at stake, what is the value they're losing, and then convincing them that it's something worth tackling at domestic level, and also with the support of intergovernmental organization. And that's our starting point, is always our countries.
Absolutely, and that's a really fair point. And I think, speaking from a World Horse Welfare and a Donkey Sanctuary perspective, I mean, we recognise the importance of working with member countries, because it's through them at the FAO and all the other global entities, the OIE, it is so important. So, no, thank you for that. Thandiwe, from your perspective, do you think the situation is improving? Do you think a national government is understanding the role of working animals and the importance of gender in that role? Do you think it's changing for the better or for the worse?
For now, for me, I'm not seeing any change. If the change is there, it's just a little. not much change in terms of recognizing, trying or beginning to recognize the contribution of women. But as for the contribution of the working animals, the donkeys, I'm not seeing any change. So for me, I think we still have a lot of work to do in terms of raising awareness, in terms of advocacy work, and in terms of trying to influence policy. I'm happy to say that we tried to influence the creation of agricultural policies in Zimbabwe, as well as the land policy. So we are trying to smuggle in some of these things and in these policies. And we are just praying that they will then take into consideration our inputs into the processes taking place.
Brilliant. And sticking with you, Thandiwe, there's a question from Henning, and he says, given the importance of working animals, to what extent are resources spent on veterinarian and animal welfare services in the high density areas? And do you have any examples you could give of such programs, their challenges and successes, particularly their impact on water? Do you have any thoughts on Henning's question there, Thandiwe?
Yeah, in terms of trying to bring services to the rural areas where we see a lot of working animals being used, and where we see a lot of women working hard in terms of providing food, in terms of tillage, growing of crops. I've seen the services, the kind of services that we are having, that the government is providing. I've seen they're providing tick grease, because a lot of the animal head in Zimbabwe has been attacked by this kind of disease they call the January disease. And so they are providing for the cattle and not the working donkeys. And then when the working donkeys are going to the deep tanks, they are accompanying the other livestock. We don't have deep tanks meant for the donkeys. If the donkeys go to the deep tanks, they go together with the animals. And when we put a donkey in an animal, in the cattle, usually the donkey is helped away, as the donkey is fought by the animals, by the other animals, like the cattle. So you would find out that the donkey is not well catered for, unlike the other the domestic animals. So our policies, they are still not sensitive to women and the working donkeys. Thus, we're trying to raise a lot of noise, a lot of awareness to the donkey owners and users.
Thandiwe, thank you so much. We're sort of beginning to drift towards the hour where we'll have to call time, but we have put up a third question, and this is very much for all of you to engage. Has this event changed your view on working animals, and what action have you been inspired to take? So that's going to be live after the end of the session as well. So it'd be great if you could take a moment to reflect on that. Now, Kusam, there's a question here that if I can find it, and I know obviously you don't have any direct experience of working equines, but obviously the issues we've talked about today, how would you see these seemingly distinct areas crossing over in programs including cooperative working, policy, or innovation? Do you have, so from your wider insight, do you have any thoughts on what lessons might be learned there?
I think that, this program should support or at least propel animal activists and gender activists, both who would need to lobby for women as well as their prime working, the welfare of their assets, the working animals. Because with climate change, we are seeing extreme events, and more disaster risk resilience is a problem that we have to encounter. So this is something that gender activists and animal activists should both work together. I think we put ourselves into different baskets, and I don't think we can afford to do that any longer.
Oh, here to that. I think that it's such an important because it's rather like that large wheel, isn't it? And each has got an important cog in that wheel, and we need to sort of develop it together to be able to create that change. So thank you for that. We are beginning to come to the end of our time, so I thought just to try and tie it all together, please do fill in the poll question. But I thought I'd just turn to each of our three panelists. Firstly, to say thank you so much for joining today's webinar. It's been fascinating. As Kusam said, it's been too long in the making, and it's delighted that we've been able to put it on today, and hopefully the second and third of many. But Daniela, having heard the presentations and the discussion we've had, what are your final thoughts from today's webinar? Oh, sorry, you're on mute, Daniela.
Okay, thanks, Rolly. Maybe more than my final thought, my final take-home message. So just after hearing all of you, I would just like to say to everybody, do acknowledge the value of your working animals. So do take good care of them, of their health, of their welfare, starting from providing them with enough good quality and safe water. They will repay you back with highly valuable services. And I would like also to congratulate you, the World Horse Welfare and Donkey Sanctuaries, for having managed to bring this topic up to the World Water Week. I think it's a good success. And I think if we continue working on this line, try to bring the image and the value of working animals in all those fora where normally they're forgotten, maybe we can bit by bit start being on the good track. It's a good step forward. Keep on doing the good work. Thank you.
Daniela, thank you very much. And as you say, yeah, it's a step forward, and we will encourage, see what we can do to take many more in the future. Kusam, what would be your final thoughts? I mean, obviously, I loved your 3 A's: awareness, advocacy, and action. What would your take-home thoughts be?
Well, as we have often said, women are the catalyst for climate change action. Now we need to empower them and support them to support their best asset, which is a working animal. So, and let us not only look at the problems that women have, but we look at also the potential of women and with the working animals. As we look at the potential of the Halari donkey in Gujarat, where the milk is sold at 7,000 rupees a litre and not at 60 rupees a litre. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a wonderful statistic there. Well, no, not a wonderful, a horrific, but a very salutary statistic to take home. Thank you, Kusam. And Thandiwe, what would your final thoughts from you be?
Yeah, I was thinking as I'm sitting here that we use the donkey to carry water and to bring water to our gardens, to bring water to our homes. Do we have water troughs for donkeys? Are our donkeys drinking safe, clean water? So my question to everybody who is using donkeys is, are you providing good quality water, safe water, water with no pathogens, water which is clean for the donkeys? And the other question is, do you know the relationship that is there between women's access to land and women's access to water? Because if you don't have access to land, where are you going to get the water? And usually the water is found on the land. So there's another big relationship between women's access to land and access to water. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Thandiwe. And what's come so clearly through is the interrelatedness of the role of working animals, the importance of gender equality, the importance of good quality water and availability of good quality water, but also obviously the role, the interrelatedness of the role of climate change through all of that, and how one very much is interrelated to the other. So I just want to finish by saying a heartfelt thank you to you, Daniela, to you, Kusam, and to Thandiwe for your wonderful contributions to today's webinar, which will certainly be available afterwards. There will be further information on around the Donkey Sanctuary and World Horse Welfare through the Pathable chat function, but also if you would like to join or interested in finding out more about the Working Animal Alliance, we'll also post some further information about that in the chat function. In the meantime, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. I wish you well in this strange world we live in, but I hope that you've enjoyed today's webinar, and most importantly, that it will empower us really all to go on and promote us all to go on and take some small steps to make this a better world for working animals, for women, and for the climate and for the environment. Thank you so much indeed.